Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. As of today, it is June 20th, so we're about a little over halfway through June, and I thought it would be fun to talk about some of my favorite books from the first half of 2022. So we're about halfway through the year, so consider this a mid-year review. If you haven't been able to tell already, am a very avid reader. I read just about anything, both fiction and nonfiction. I will read just about any nonfiction, with the exception of maybe true crime, and I will read just about any fiction. I especially love sci-fi and fantasy, but I'll read just about anything except for anything super scary or anything that romance is the main theme. So I'm an avid reader, I'll read just about anything, and I love my public library because I could not afford my reading habit without them. Thank you that my taxes go to the public library. Anyways, there were some books that I did not enjoy in the first half of 2020, which I could talk about those, but I kind of like to focus on the positive in life, so I'm just going to focus on the books that I did enjoy in the first half of 2022. As of today, June 20th, I have read 104 books, and that is out of my yearly goal of 150 books. That's my normal goal, and then I have a stretch goal of 250 books, which I'm not sure if I'll hit 250, but I should be able to hit 150. And I have read over 150 books at least the last 2 years. So I've hit that goal both in 2020 and 2021. So I'm on track to hit it for 2022. And as always, I discover a lot of great books in the process. So let's dive in and talk about some of my favorite books from the first half of 2022. The first one is Pantheon, The True Story of Egyptian Deities by Steele. This is a comic version of the Egyptian deities and their story, and it's translated and set in a modern language, so it's available to the modern reader, but I would caution that this is not a book for children, or at least make sure you read it and you're comfortable with your kids knowing everything in it, because the Egyptian deities and the stories of their pantheon can get incredibly violent and incredibly explicit at times, and the format kind of doesn't fully communicate that when you see this fun, colorful comic strip. So the Egyptian pantheon is something that most of us have had a passing experience with, whether in school where we learned some of the big gods, or maybe we're a little bit familiar that the Egyptians would mummify their people, for especially rulers or important people, for the afterlife. So we have kind of a few basic familiarities. Some of us know about like weighing the soul against I think it was like a feather of truth, and just determining whether someone could enter the afterlife, or like the good part of the afterlife. But most of us don't know the story from beginning to end because we only hear little bits and pieces of the pantheon and the stories of the gods therein. So this book kind of sets things in a chronological order of kind of the big events that happen in Egyptian mythology. And I thought it was very, very well done. It was very, very interesting, and I thought it was very accessible to a modern reader. I especially appreciated it being put in chronological order, because sometimes when you're reading myths, you don't really know what comes first in the whole cycle. And sometimes I think it can be hard to tell, but the book laid it out in a very clear way, and also had a very clear handy chart at the beginning to keep you sorted out with all of your gods and goddesses and other deities and magical and fantastical creatures. So I thought this was a really good addition to the list, and a great way to start. So if you are interested in reading a little bit more about the Egyptian pantheon, but maybe want something super accessible and not too much of a commitment to read, this is a great place to start. And then if you're interested in anything that you come across in the book, you can dive into it in another way. So let's go on to number 2, which is a manga series, and that is A Man and His Cat by Me Sakurai. In this manga series, I've read volumes 1 through 5 because that is what my library has right now. I'm not sure if there's any more. I think there may be some more, but my library just doesn't have them. This focuses on a cat that is unwanted. He has been at the pet store for about a year while everyone else got adopted as a kitten, and this man comes in and adopts the cat, and they kind of bond with one another. The cat's name is Fukumaru. The man's name is Mr. Kanda. Mr. Kanda has recently lost his wife and also kind of lost his passion for playing piano, and it's kind of that classic story of who rescued whom. It is incredibly wholesome. It is like wholesomeness just compressed into a few slim volumes of manga. I wound up recommending this volume or this series to my sister, who read it, and I didn't provide any real background on it other than saying I thought it was super cute, and she told me this is wholesomeness just pressed into a manga. So if you're looking for something super wholesome, A Man and His Cat by Me Sakurai is probably the way you want to go. My third entry on this list of my favorite reads from the first half of 2022 is another manga series. This is just a 2-volume series, so I don't know what you'd call that. A duet? I don't know what two's called. A pair? Okay. It is My Brother's Husband by Gengoro Tagame. I have the name written down so I can say it correctly. Gengoro Tagame. My Brother's Husband focuses on a man in Japan coming to terms with the fact that his brother is gay. His brother actually came out when he was in high school or when he was younger, but he wound up moving away to Canada and marrying a man. And he has since passed away, and the man that his brother married has come to Japan to kind of meet the family that he never got to meet. And it's a story of him kind of experiencing this culture shock where in Japan it's a lot less socially acceptable to be gay, or a lot of people who are gay, as he finds out in the story, tend to keep it to themselves, where in Canada it's a very different or much more open culture with regard to that, and he has to experience this difference while the brother has to come to terms with the fact that maybe he did push his brother away a little bit for this, and he kind of regrets not getting to know him while he's alive, but he can make that right a little bit by making sure that his parents, now deceased, can be introduced to their son's husband at the family altar, and that he can kind of show hospitality to this man who was such a big part of his brother's life. So it's super wholesome, and I'd heard a lot about it, and it definitely lived up to the hype. I believe the author was previously very well known for writing like erotic gay manga, and this is his first foray into something that's a little bit more family accessible or family friendly. So if gay erotic manga sounds interesting to you, I would probably check out his other works. I think he's pretty well known for that. That's not really my cup of tea, so I would just probably stick with this because this is the first thing he's written that's a little bit more my speed. But if you're into that, I would probably recommend checking out the author because it sounds like he's written quite a bit of stuff. Number 3 or number 4, whatever we are on, is kind of a no-brainer. I read a Terry Pratchett book, Witches Abroad, and I loved it. I love witches, I love Terry Pratchett. What's not to love? This one just follows the Weird Sisters, who are a group of women in Terry Pratchett's world, as they go on a journey because they have to stop someone from marrying someone else in this kingdom. And yeah, it's kind of a mashup of different fairy tales, and it's very, very interesting. Plus, I just love the witches as they go on their journey and they explore new lands. I thought it was super funny. I was rolling on the floor laughing multiple times while reading this book. Actually, I was falling off the couch because I was laying on the couch. But similar vibes. And I just really love it. If you like Terry Pratchett, it's a great entry. You've got to read it. Witches Abroad. Not much else to say there, but yeah, love Terry Pratchett. Have 2 of his books, 3 of his books here. I didn't even know I had the 3rd one. So yeah, as you might know, I get a lot of my books from the library, and that's because I move a lot right now, and moving books is probably the worst task in the world when moving. I'd rather move my furniture than pack up all my books. They're very, very heavy, but I love Terry Pratchett so much that I frequently request copies of his books as Christmas presents so I can physically own a copy because I love them that much. The next book is, what are we on, number 5? That I enjoyed this first half was more of a thing to look at than an actual book, and that was Janet Fish. I don't really know what the title is. I do have a review on my channel of that book, and it was just a book of some of the work by the artist Janet Fish, author or artist I was not familiar with, and just pulled it out because I thought the cover looked really pretty on the library shelf, and I found out really, really enjoying her work, and I just browsed it for an afternoon and just enjoyed the artistry and the clear work that she's put into that. So if you're interested in art, or it looks kind of interesting or pretty, what I show in my review video, then go ahead and check it out. I really liked her work, and yeah, I'd love to see it in person someday because I thought it was really well done. And yeah, I don't know if I can really provide any more of a critique on the art because I'm not a very artistic person, but I do appreciate art and I love looking at it. So it was a great entry, and it's something I really enjoyed the first half of 2022. The next one I have up is something that I checked out only because I had a cute little alien creature on the cover, and I wound up absolutely loving it. I thought it was so funny, while also kind of delving into some more difficult topics, and that is Terminal Alliance, which is book number 1 of the Janitors of the Apocalypse, and this is by Jim C. Hines. So this is a sci-fi book, and it follows a group of janitors on a ship, and the ship is infected with something, and the only people not infected are the janitorial crew. So in this post-apocalyptic world, which kind of ties into the sci-fi, humans were exposed to something that turned them all feral, and now one of the alien species has a cure, so they're bringing humans back slowly but surely, and the humans become unferal, but in like small batches. Only a couple come back at a time, or a couple. I mean, there was billions of humans, so they can't bring billions back at once, but they're coming back, so they're very much feared. So it's that kind of sci-fi where humans, instead of being the one who are scared of the aliens are kind of scared slash in awe of humans because they're like superhuman compared to everyone else. They can eat anything, and they're super powerful, especially when feral. So the janitorial crew is headed by a human, and her crew have to try to figure out what's going on in the ship, why everyone's infected, and what they can do about it. And they discover some secrets about the military and humans' past that they didn't know before and was kind of being kept from them. So I thought it was really, really interesting. For something I just pulled out of the library because the cover was cute, it wound up being a very, very good pick. So maybe do sometimes judge a book by its cover. I don't know. The next one was a nonfiction book that I read that I checked out just to maybe get some interesting facts, but I wound up enjoying a lot more than I thought I was going to. That was The Subplot, What China is Reading and Why It Matters by Megan Walsh. This book is exactly what the title says, What China is Reading and Why It Matters, and it's what the Chinese audience is reading, written by Chinese authors who live in China. So her kind of focus is this relationship between the author and the Chinese state and their work and how they kind of mix together, and also what the public audience likes. And I thought it was so interesting and well done. I don't think you need any sort of introduction to the subject to enjoy this book, but they really get deep into the topics and you feel like you're really learning quite a bit. I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I was going to. I don't really know why I didn't really think I was not going to enjoy it, but I thought it was more like, I'm going to read this book, and it was pretty short too. I want to say it was just over 100 pages. Read it, get some fun facts, move on, and I really enjoyed it. I devoured it so fast, and I actually probably want to get a copy of it because I like it so much. So yeah, give it a try if it sounds interesting at all. I've recommended it to a couple other people. Don't know if anyone's taken me up on it just because it seems like out there, it seems like lofty literary criticism that's not really accessible to the average person, but I don't read a lot of literary criticism, and I feel like I could access the book. It was very accessible, and it was very enjoyable and entertaining and captured the audience, and it didn't feel like it was speaking to other PhDs who knew all the lingo and the buzzwords, and yeah, it felt very accessible. So really recommend. I can't get anyone to take me up on reading it, but if you do read it, let me know what you think because I would love to talk to someone else who's read that book. The next one, I promise we're getting to the bottom of this list, is Breaking the Age Code by Becca Levy. And that kind of sounds like a book that's like, take this magic pill and you will not grow old, which is kind of what I thought it was going to be going into it. And I was like, well, we'll see what this is about. And this was kind of a eye-opening book that's probably had the most impact on my life that I've read this year. The author, so let's back up. Before I read this book, if you had asked me if older people were discriminated against, I would probably say yes. I was familiar with the fact that older workers sometimes struggled to find jobs after losing a job, maybe in their 50s, because they weren't perceived as valuable in the workforce. But I would consider myself having a very healthy view on aging. I have a lot of healthy examples of older people. And something that was mentioned early in the book is like when you think of an older person, and then she went on to say like someone in their 40s, and I was like, what, 40s? When I think older person, I think of someone in their like mid to late 80s, and that's probably because I have such a healthy view of aging of people around me. However, she pointed out a lot of ways in which society discriminates against older people and ways that it's crippling us because we're pushing aside people with very valuable experience because we, especially in the United States, really have this cult about youth and young achievement and what someone who's 22 can accomplish, while completely dismissing the fact that someone who's 72 has this wealth of knowledge and this very broad experience that they can leverage and bring to conversation or to problems. And you're also pushing out, especially in the workforce, you're pushing out when you push out these seasoned employees, you're also pushing out that wealth of knowledge that they've accumulated. Anyone who's worked in a work environment, like an office environment, you know the one person who works in that one department who's been there for 50 years, who knows how to solve every problem. And you're like, this is the most wonderful person here because I always know that she knows the solution because she knows everything in the whole company. And that's the kind of stuff you lose when you push these people out. She also makes a really good point but she talks about how your attitude about aging will affect how you age. And that's something I do see modeled around me by the older individuals in my life. They really don't say, well, now I'm 50, so I can't do X, Y, and Z. Oh, excuse me. The thoughts you have about aging really do impact how you age. And she really referenced a lot of people who live in Japan, which has a much healthier view about aging, or at least a lot of the older people do have a lot healthier view about aging, and how they actually age better because of their thoughts about aging. So how you think about aging actually will impact how you age. And since reading this book, I have noticed the ageism everywhere. And it was always there. It's the kind of thing that you don't notice until someone points it out very explicitly. And she makes a good point in her book saying that this is one of the few forms of accepted ageism that still exists. And that is absolutely true. People say stuff all the time that since reading this book, I'm like, oh my word, why would I can't agree with that. Like, I know people who don't fall into that stereotype. And by repeating this belief to people that like, well, you can't learn anything after the age of 50, or older workers just need to be pushed out, or you're priming the younger people who you're telling this to have those beliefs when they grow older, and therefore kind of fulfill this self-fulfilling prophecy where they can't. And she talks about people in places like Japan or other areas where aging is less stigmatized, and how they actually have healthier aging and they actually do better in their old age, and how they continue to enjoy life because they don't have those beliefs that maybe here in the United States we do have. This was an eye-opening book. If you read anything out of this list, I would really recommend reading this one. That is Breaking the Age Code by Becca Levy. This was game-changing, and I noticed the ageism that's all around me, and I'm definitely trying to do a better job of making sure that I don't say things that are ageist, because I notice a lot, sometimes my first thought is something that I'm like, wow, I'm judging that person because of their age and no other reason. So this was a game-changing book for me, and I think everyone should read it. Excuse me. I think I inhaled a floating piece of dust or something. Okay, next on my list, I promise we're almost getting done, is Basilisks and Beowulf by Tim Flight. This book discusses the Anglo-Saxon world and the myths and monsters in it and the way they were viewed. So he talks a lot about boundaries and how monsters were on one side of the boundary and humans were on the other side of the boundary. And things are very monstrous and scary, not when the monsters existed, but when the monsters crossed these boundaries. He talks also about people who cross these boundaries. So the monsters like wolves that go and steal sheep, or Grendel and Grendel's mother in Beowulf that cross those boundaries and interact with humans, which is very monstrous. But he also makes a really good point that people, especially heroes like Beowulf, there's a whole section on Beowulf and how he actually crosses those boundaries himself, and is another one of these, they call him Merksteppen. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, an old English word, Merksteppen, as in people who cross the boundary. So not only do the monsters cross the boundary, but Beowulf is someone who also crosses that boundary in the opposite way when he goes to Grendel's lair, or Grendel's mother's lair, to kind of take care of that whole situation. This book was very, very enlightening and eye-opening. I really enjoyed it. I wish I had had this book when I was reading Beowulf in the 11th or 12th grade in high school, because I think it would have provided a lot of interesting context to what I was reading and would have given me that extra depth. That's something that I felt like was lacking in the Beowulf reading. We read it, we discussed it, we kind of went over some basic things, but I feel like this book just went so much deeper and was also very, like I said before about another book, very accessible. You're able to read it without having a PhD in the Anglo-Saxon world and their myths and beliefs and their worldview. This book was, very, very interesting. It kind of kicked off some of the other books that I've been reading for the last couple months. They talk about whales, they talk about wolves, they talk about dragons. There's a very interesting part where they say to someone living in medieval England, a camel could be just as false as a dragon or just as real as a dragon. So you're kind of getting in that mindset of someone who maybe hasn't seen these things, and also understanding how they view things as monstrous and why they view certain things as monstrous. So I thought this was a really, really well done book. And if you're interested in the Anglo-Saxon world, if you're interested in the medieval world, this is definitely something that I think you would read and really, really enjoy. And it can kick off some other reading if there's topics in there that you enjoy. The final one on my list, we've made it, is Math Without Numbers by Milo Beckham. So I love math. I actually received my 4-year college degree in mathematics. I loved it so much, and yeah, I feel like I'm pretty comfortable with math. I'm not easily scared of math. I enjoy reading about math for fun too, but there's a lot of people who don't have a good experience with math. I think a lot of that stems from not having a good math experience in school, and therefore kind of losing out on this very rich and valuable field of knowledge that is very stigmatized. I feel like a lot of people I run into hate math, and I think that hate of math really comes from poor interactions with it early in school, which is unfortunate because there's so much there. Milo Beckham promises to introduce math, and not just like fractions and how do we cut a pie up, but actual like deep concepts in math without numbers. And I think he does a very, very good job. And I think it's a very interesting read for people with more math experience like myself, to people who had a horrible experience with math and quit as soon as they stopped having math requirements. Like as soon as they didn't have to take any more math classes, they were done. This book, I think, is also really, really good because if you have, for those who don't enjoy math, opening up a book and seeing a bunch of numbers is probably a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Like closing off experience. Like you think, well, I'm not going to be able to understand this, and you shut the book. So by taking the numbers out and really just explaining things with clear pictures and diagrams and explanations, you kind of remove that barrier of fear and you say, hey, this is something we can all understand. And we're not just talking about very basic math, but we can get into some very interesting topics in mathematics, stuff that isn't covered in high school because they're just kind of trying to get to the fundamentals in high school, and maybe the high school math system could be set up better. But is probably more interesting than just like the basic algebra that you had to do every single night when you went home from 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, whenever you were doing algebra. So I think by removing numbers and explaining these very interesting concepts without numbers, he kind of opens the door for those people who are kind of shut out of the whole math system at a young age. So yeah, I really, really thought this was a good book, and I think that it's very accessible and enjoyable, and I think you would enjoy it if you haven't had a great experience with math but are interested in learning more. So that's it. Those are my recommendations from the first half of 2022. Those are some books I really, really enjoyed, and I think you might too. So if you've read any of these or any of these sounded interesting, please let me know. Please read them. And yeah, let me know what you think. And what are your favorite books from the first half of 2022? Have you read anything interesting? I'm always looking for book recommendations, dependent on if my library has them and if they're checked out of my library. I will get to them and I will read them as soon as they are returned to my library or as soon as I can acquire them. Other than that, everyone, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.